had an enjoyable day so far. This initiative that we're all working on today has focused on how the students of Alberta think our school can show climate leadership in a future of climate change. We have collaborated for countless hours on several topics with students around the province. We have also confronted the problems we face with solutions, and we, the students of Alberta, are ready to start changing the world, starting with our own province. Today, we will be connecting with students across the province to discuss how our schools can show climate leadership. But this isn't just about climate change. It's also about learning and teaching ourselves and our future generations. What better person to lead us in this discussion about climate leadership than Premier Notley, who has taken these initiatives in terms of the crisis we're facing, and she's working towards actions that can better our future.
Premier Notley was first elected as an MLA for the constituency of Edmonton Strathcona. She was re-elected in 2012 and became her party leader in 2014. In May of 2015, Premier Notley made history, forming Alberta's first new democratic government. Premier Notley's platform promises and continues to promote economic diversification, an open, honest government, and job creation in Alberta. The Premier continues to support the preservation and enhancement of the healthcare system and education systems. Premier Notley has set an example for us, the youth, and the rest of Canada as to what true leadership looks like. And now, it is our pleasure and privilege to welcome back to Queen Elizabeth High School the Premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley.
Thank you. Got it? Okay. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Let me just say, I think I'd love to have both of you in the House right now, in the legislature. Very nice tone. Let me just make sure that this mic is working. Yeah, okay. Let me begin by acknowledging, of course, to everybody that we are gathered here today on the traditional lands of Treaty 6. And as we gather today in person and via video conference, to discuss the future of our province and the future of our planet. Let us draw inspiration from the traditional stewards of this land and honor it as they have for generations. So it's really such a pleasure for me to be here today and to share this morning with you. I was so impressed by your thoughtful presentation and insightful questions the last time that we met here at Queen Elizabeth School. Then and now, I was quite honestly blown away by your drive and your determination to stand up and to be heard on this critically important issue. And when it comes to leadership on climate change, you have all stepped up in a very big way. You've produced, as I said the last time that I was here, one of the most extensive climate change documents ever written by young people. And I'm so proud of the leadership shown by Alberta's students on this issue. When I talk about climate change, whether it's to my colleagues in the legislature or to world leaders in Paris, something I've got to do after I last saw you guys, I always talk about our responsibility to future generations, because while climate change is already affecting us here in Alberta, and we all know that, the most intense effects of climate change will be experienced in the years and the decades to come by you, the young people of today, and by your children, and heaven forbid, I know it doesn't come into your mind, but your grandchildren. More than anyone, you have a stake in this fight. It's your future that we're talking about here. And your work on this white paper will help to shape that future. Quite often, politicians talk about your generation as the leaders of tomorrow. But really, you've proven that tomorrow can't wait. And Alberta's youth can and must take a leadership role today. Leadership on climate change is one of the best things that we can do to secure a healthy and prosperous future for our province. And when my government was elected last spring, we promised that we would take action on climate change. We knew that COP21 was only 6 short months away, and we knew that our province's interaction with those meetings in the past had not been the things or the sources of pride in the past. So we got to work because we thought we could make that a different outcome. So we appointed an expert panel and started a province-wide discussion on Alberta's future and ways that we could reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We knew it wouldn't be easy. Alberta's economy is largely based on oil and gas. It's an important industry to us, and I'm sure many of your parents are employed in the energy industry, or your relatives or friends of your family. So we created a plan that will help protect those jobs, diversify our economy, and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. You will recognize many features of our plan from your white paper from last year's recommendations for Alberta. First of all, we put a price on carbon. And this is because it will encourage all of us, from the biggest company to individual Albertans, to consider the full cost of carbon emissions and to reduce them even as we are using them. We will invest the funds from the carbon price into innovation, technology, public transit, and energy efficiency, measures that will effectively double down on reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. In effect, the carbon price today will help reduce the carbon emissions of tomorrow. We will also use the fund to help low and middle income families with heating and power costs, and to support businesses, coal workers, and Indigenous communities as they make the transition to a greener future. Second, we're phasing out coal-fired power. Right now, as many of you I'm sure already know, Alberta burns more coal for electricity than the rest of the country combined. That is simply not sustainable, not only for our environment, but for our health. Coal emissions pollute our air and cost Alberta hundreds of millions of dollars in healthcare costs every single year. By 2030, Alberta will phase out coal, and we will have moved to much more renewable power like wind and solar, while at the same time increasing our use of cleaner burning fuels like natural gas. Third, we've put a cap on oil sands emissions. This will ensure that the oil sands can continue to operate, providing jobs and contributing to our economy, but it will also ensure that they operate more efficiently and reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in every barrel of oil they produce. This is Alberta's climate leadership plan, and we had it ready to go for Paris. COP21 was Alberta's chance to show the world that we are ready to step up and part on climate change. For far too long, Alberta's reputation was one of an environmental laggard. But at COP21, leaders from around the world took notice. And it's been about 4 months since Paris, only 4 months. It seems like 4 months and also 4 years. But Alberta's reputation on the world stage is already improving, and we see that in so many different ways. People are realizing that energy producers can be environmental leaders, and we're setting an example for provinces, states, and countries around the world. Alberta is establishing our place as leaders in the global effort to fight climate change. And I'm proud to say that we not only have one of the strongest and most stringent climate change strategies in the country, we have one of the best plans of any energy producer in the world. Albertans should be proud of our plan, but this is only the beginning. Your generation will continue this fight. You will continue this project. Action on climate change isn't just about countries and provinces and industry, although it is about all those people, all those bodies improving what they do over time. It's also about each and every one of us. We all have the ability to step up and be leaders on climate change. That's what you've done with your white paper. And we need to work together to find new ways to engage all Albertans in this effort. Education does play a critical role in this. We must explore ways for our education system to shape new generations of engaged citizens. Our schools need to prepare students for the innovative, sustainable careers of the future. And I look forward to hearing from all of you about your ideas. You're on the front line of this issue, and my government is listening. Alberta's future will be shaped by your leadership, your enthusiasm, and your dedication. And by working together, we can make that future a greener and cleaner one. So let's get started. I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your questions and your ideas. And I think I'm talking to the people that are off in video land, which I understand there are thousands of, through that little camera there. Isn't someone going to nod and say, that's kind of it? That's it? Okay, good. So, hi. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody here and everybody inside that teeny little camera. So let's get started.
Thank you, Premier. Our first question is coming from Stephanie at Queen Elizabeth High School in Edmonton.
All right, this mic is working. So I, like many of my peers, have thought a lot about how Alberta's schools could show climate leadership, and I've come to the conclusion that when it comes to learning, it means learning about the environment and energy in all of our classes, in social studies, science, English, and math, all the way from kindergarten to grade 12. Some might say that this seems like a lot of work, but I feel that this is what needs to happen. What do you think?
Well, thank you. I mean, that's really a great idea. I think that, we know that climate change is a fundamental part of our lives, and we know that it's going to impact so much of what we do, and that the changes that we have to make are going to impact so much of what we have to do. And so there's so many different settings in which we can talk about that. So again, I mean, I know, quite frankly, there's some schools, kindergartens, where kids talk about that now, and I see pictures that they draw and stories that they tell, and it's really inspiring. And I think there's opportunity to build that into what we talk about throughout school, because again, it is a question about choices that you make now, that your family makes now, and that you will make throughout your life when you become leaders as well, in government, in industry, in business, as employees, as workers. Throughout it all, we can make those choices. And so I think that it's important to enhance the education around the issue. So, we'll be looking at ways in which we can do that. In a collaborative way, not only with teachers and with school boards, but also with students. And so I'm really pleased to hear you guys talking about that, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what we reading what is produced in your white paper this year on that very issue.
Thank you, Premier, and thank you, Stephanie. Let's go across now to our friends in Bonnyville, who will be asking the next question from Notre Dame. Bonnyville, over to you.
We think that climate leadership is immensely important, especially in Alberta in an oil and gas industry. What does being a climate leader mean to you? How do you personally incorporate this into your work and your life?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it's a big part of my life right now, because above and beyond first of all, obviously, as you know, on my professional life, I just spent about 10 minutes telling you how it's a big part of my life as the Premier of the province, trying to change the direction of a province that for many, many years has not been taking meaningful action on this issue, and repositioning Alberta not as a province that is trying to pretend the issue isn't there and not making eye contact with people whenever the issue comes up, but rather as a province that is taking a leadership role in our country and on our continent. And so in my professional life, it's kind of a thing that I'm attuned to every day, and it's quite honestly, it's one of the biggest policy initiatives that our government is doing across the whole board. And so, as Premier, I'm never unengaged in the issue. We're always looking at the many, many facets of it. On my personal life, that's a really good question. We just got rid of our second car, so we're down to one car. We bought a much smaller car, and I had the debate with my husband about why it was we needed to have a car that was so darn big that had such many emissions. Debate continues, but so far on the current car, I won. And I like to walk to work as much as possible. That's partially an environmental thing and partially a walking to work thing. And then, of course, my daughter will be horrified on this, but our dishwasher broke and we never actually replaced it. She just does the dishes all the time. You'd be amazed how much water you save by doing that. And she's marginally in favor of it. Actually, she's mostly not, but she's contributing to some very good environmental choices.
Thank you, Bonnyville. Let's go across now to our friends in Jasper Place. Jasper Place, would you like to ask your question?
Hi. How did the education you received when you were younger shape how you look at environmental sustainability and awareness now?
Well, that's a really good question. I have to be, I'm really old, first of all. So I will say that this was not as large a discussion. It wasn't as critical a topic when I was in school, when I was your age. And so when people talked about the environment, they talked more at the time. There was a lot of conversation, I remember, about acid rain. There was even then concern about coal, and the effect it had on people's ability, on asthma and breathing and things like that. But we didn't have this larger issue of climate change hanging over us, and so in a way, I think it's got to be kind of tough for your generation in many ways, because we have this large issue hanging over us that has some very, very serious consequences for the future. And that's not something that was part of the conversation as much when I was younger. But even then, of course, we learned bits and pieces from certain teachers about, for instance, our Indigenous heritage, and the Indigenous history of our province, so I learned through that about the relationship with the land that people can have that's different from what perhaps we always thought of as being the primary way to relate to the land in the 70s and 80s, which was when I was your age. And then, of course, my parents were just generally speaking conscious of environmental issues and big social justice advocates. My dad was a politician and my mother was an activist, and she just volunteered in our community. So I learned a lot from them and from talking to them, and watching what they did and their friends. So, in many ways, you learn things very similarly now to how you did back then. It would have been nice to have had a bit more in the schools on it, but it makes sense that we didn't, because, as I said, it wasn't as big an issue, or there wasn't as large awareness of it at the time. And of course, we didn't do social media, so we spent a lot more time talking to each other about these issues. But I think now there's more opportunities than ever for young people to share their ideas and share their wisdom and share their plans, and to make plans and to have an impact, because it's so much easier for you to communicate with each other. And so that is incredibly exciting, and it means that there's greater potential than ever for young people to have a major effect on issues that they care about.
Great, thank you. Let's go now to our friends all the way in southern Alberta, Pincher Creek. Do you have a question for our Premier? Over to you.
Okay. I notice most of my teachers are under considerable pressure to cover a lot of content in the courses they teach and seem squeezed for time. We never seem able to go very deeply into any one topic or issue in our courses. What can be done by the Ministry of Education to enable teachers and students to go more deeply into big issues such as climate change?
Well, I think there's a lot of creative ideas out there. I don't want to step in for teachers specifically on these issues, because I think there are some excellent teaching strategies out there to do exactly this. I think this very forum right now is an excellent example of how you can get people to engage more definitively in the topic. I think it's one of those things where it's a combination. You find the time. You can, of course, do stuff after school. You can have clubs outside of school that focus on these issues. And then, of course, you can also, I suppose, have projects that really are built around how you can make changes in your life at home on your own time that impact these issues. The other option, of course, is to get rid of summer holidays and just have you go to school for 12 months. So there's that. I'm not seeing a whole bunch of excitement in response to that. But there's no question. There's a lot of things that people have to learn. But one of the previous questions talked about the idea of incorporating some of the principles that need to be learned around climate change and greenhouse gas emissions and greenhouse gas emission reductions throughout the education system, so that some things are just understood as a given as you go through, and you don't have to introduce the topic as a brand new thing when someone starts grade 10 social studies, for instance. Rather, people understand components of it throughout their education career. And so that's why I like, the ideas around that. And I think maybe that's what you're getting at in your question too. So it's worth further consideration and discussion about how that can happen.
Now, from one end of our province all the way up to the other, we're going to go up to our friends. Oh, nope, I don't want to forget Calgary in between. So, Career and Technology Centre, over to you in Calgary. Your question for the Premier. Go ahead.
Hi. I've begun working on a project to get solar panels installed on many Calgary Board of Education properties. From talking with the Director of Facilities for the CBE, I've learned that large-scale solar installation isn't actually far off in an economic sense and would be possible with just a little bit of help. What do you think of using the CBE, Alberta's largest school district, as a pilot project to increase solar usage in Alberta, as well as build kids' awareness about energy efficiency and renewable energy? Who would I talk to in your government about getting this low-cost energy and education idea off the ground if you thought the idea was worth pursuing?
Well, let me just say that the focus that you bring to this project makes me think, I don't know, maybe we need to be hiring someone a lot like you to be the person you would talk to. But in actual fact, as you probably know, because you would have been studying this, our climate change leadership plan, as I said in my remarks, we talk about the issue of reusing and recycling every cent of the levy back into the economy, which is very critical, and the different categories of use through which we'll be recycling that money back into the economy. And so we've talked about adjustment, and that's the category that will deal with rebates and helping particularly vulnerable industries and that kind of thing. And then the other piece is what is generally referred to as investment. And so one of the things that we talked about in our throne speech just a couple of weeks ago, and that you'll see more information about in the budget, is the idea, or is the fact that we are going to finally, after decades of being the only province in the country without an energy efficiency program, we're going to establish an energy efficiency agency that will be robustly funded to do and to support exactly the kind of work that you're talking about. Because one of the things that we heard about from our climate change panel is that as much as there's a lot of people out there that like the idea of putting a panel on their roof, which we absolutely want to support that and do what we can to make that happen. But that you actually get the best outcome and the greatest result by working with larger centers, just like, for instance, a school board, just like schools, and doing a more sort of utility level of installation of efficiency measures, which of course will include solar panels, and thereby achieving significant reductions very quickly. So it's exactly that kind of idea that you're going to see our energy efficiency group work with. And then on top of it, there will be other programs to incent renewable energy production and companies that do that work in terms of inviting them to participate on our electricity grid, which is a very complicated and challenging issue because we have the only deregulated electricity grid practically in North America. But that being said, we still have some ideas for how to manage that. And so through that incenting, we'll be able to bring more solar and wind on. But you're absolutely right that solar, it's sort of on the cusp right now in terms of the economics of it, but every year it becomes more efficient and more economical. And I think that we have some tremendous potential in that area going forward. So thank you so much for your work and your ideas. Those are really practical ideas. And in answer to your question, Shannon Phillips is the Minister of Environment, and I think that she would actually quite love the opportunity to meet with you and people from the CBE to talk specifically about this issue.
Wonderful. Thank you, Calgary. Let's now hop on up to our friends in Fort McMurray. Over to you, Fort McMurray, for your first question. Go ahead.
I fondly remember filling the school greenhouse and working in the garden. I felt more appreciative of the environment while being surrounded by the nature and became more aware of its beauty. How important do you think it is for our education system to include these kind of activities to help students develop this sort of personal connection to the environment?
Well, thank you for that question. I think those kinds of hands-on opportunities are really important, particularly, well, you're in Fort McMurray, so it's not as big a deal because, of course, in many ways, I mean, Fort McMurray is a very beautiful city that's, sort of cradled in a very beautiful environment around it. But a lot of people grow up in the city and don't get the connection to the land that you're describing, or to gardening, or to the soil. And so certainly I think there's a lot of good reasons to try and enhance that and encourage that as much as you can in your school programming. I mean, people asked about my history. I mean, I will say one thing. I mean, I grew up in rural Alberta. I lived on a quarter section, so it's more than an acreage. It was many acres, and spent a lot of time outside working with the land, whether I wanted to or not. It was just one of those things you had to do. So you have that connection and that comfort and also that respect. And I think that that's really important for all kids, and particularly it's possible. I remember I met a fellow in Vancouver once who described why I'd left Edmonton, and I didn't agree with him, but one thing he did describe was, I get up in the morning, I walk from my house to my attached garage, I get into my vehicle, I drive along a freeway, I go to my office, I park in the underground parkade, I take an elevator up to my office, I do my work, and then I repeat the same thing back, and I am never outside. And that is not the way, frankly, it's not a healthy way to live anyway, for a whole bunch of reasons. It's not healthy for, urban planning and all that kind of stuff. It's also not healthy for people. So the more you can get out, the better. One thing I did want to just throw out there, which is a little bit different than the greenhouse idea, but though in terms of practical ways to make changes, I don't know if anyone's ever thought about this, but this just popped into my head. Like, how many people at high school drive to school right now? Like, how many people in this room drive to school? Wow, just not very many, eh? Wow, it's amazing. Because, I've been to other schools where the parking lot is full of students who have their vehicles in the parking lot and they drive to school. And certainly when I grew up, a lot of people drove to school by the time they were in grade 11 and 12. So what about carpooling? What about putting together carpooling as an idea to stop people from driving and thinking that each person has to be in their own vehicle to get to and from school? Just a thought. Anyway, thank you for your question.
On behalf of ADLC students at Queen Elizabeth High School, we have another question here at Queenie on behalf of ADLC. Go ahead.
So this student said, I remember in my home country, we lacked the proper resources and management to integrate environmental learning. Compared to there, Alberta is a very rich place. In 2014, the government collected $7.4 billion for K-12 education and gave most of this, approximately $6.4 billion, to Alberta school boards to help run our schools and pay our teachers. What advice do you have for us to convince these school boards to spend this money in a way that helps schools show climate leadership, and what could you do to help?
Well, thank you. That's a wonderful question. And it's really important to remember, too, that, even as we spend a lot of time talking, and rightly, about the struggles that we're facing in Alberta right now as a result of the drop in the price of oil and the resulting slowdown in the economy, which are not insubstantial. Those are some challenges, particularly compared to what we're used to having in our province. But notwithstanding that, it's very important to sort of have that perspective from someone who's come from a different country altogether, because we are a wealthy province, we are a wealthy country, we are very privileged, and so within those parameters we actually have tremendous opportunities. And I think that's a really important point that questioner made. I would say in terms of the school boards, the EPSB, for instance, the school board that governs your school, does have a youth committee, and it has an opportunity for youth to be involved. But I would suggest even going further and asking for an opportunity to present to your school board. They meet publicly quite regularly. Pull together some of your friends and people that agree with you on these issues, and make presentations regularly to the school board and ask them for this. They talk about their capital plan at their public meetings, so why not go to them and say, your capital plan needs to designate more work and more investment into efficiency, for instance. For us, again, as I said to the last questioner, we have these kinds of conversations. You have your MLA here, Chris Nielsen, which is helpful. But for students across the province, engage with your MLAs. Tell them what you want them to see. It's really important for you to engage with your MLAs. MLAs love to hear from people under 50. And we're particularly pumped about hearing from people 18 and under. So, engage with your MLAs about how the government can do even more. And then keep, as I say, we're going to be continuing to have forums within which to consult with people about how to best invest some of this money from the climate change levy, both through the efficiency agency I talked about, as well as the electricity grid incentives. So I think there's lots of opportunities for us to work together, and I'm really excited about being here and remembering that we need to make sure that we find a way to have young people included in those conversations.
Premier Notley, our time has come to a close. So if you do have any closing remarks, challenges you'd like to put forward to the students as they continue on their day of work to create this paper, we invite you, we'd be honored to hear them.
Well, I think I've said a lot. I really just think that it's really important for, I was talking with your principal about our experience when we were high school students and how both of us are collectively so impressed with the engagement that we see from so many of you on this issue. And it's sometimes a bit overwhelming to talk to people about things that you want to see. But I think it's really important to remember that your voice is important, and most politicians understand that, and that your voice is genuine, and we want to hear it. And so my biggest advice to you is to make sure that when you do these papers, you think about at the end of them, okay, what's our strategy to make sure that people in decision-making positions hear this and then are accountable to us, and come up with those strategies and engage. There's no, I sometimes I get very frustrated with the political process, but I actually quite love it. And I think the more engaged all young people can be, the better it is for all of us going forward. So thank you so much.
All right, so on behalf of our school, but also on behalf of basically everybody involved in this, I'd just like to thank you for your time and contribution. Your insight is greatly appreciated, and it's very informative, and you truly will help us move forward in this process of encompassing climate change in every aspect of education. So as a token of our appreciation, I would like to give this to you as a gift. So.
Oh, wow. More clothing from Queenie. Oh, and a water bottle. I really need that. I was looking for mine this morning, so this is very timely. Thank you very much.
So thank you again.
Okay.